Well, welcome to this last part of this series. I hope you've enjoyed the first two. This is the last part, and basically, what we're going to look at is what is a psychopath. There's also a really nice little test to do right at the end to see if you indeed exhibit psychopathic tendencies. Over the past 2 weeks, we've looked at the case file of Peter Manuel. Secondly, we looked at Peter Manuel, was he mad or bad? And you can see finally as this series draws to a close, we're going to be looking at what constitutes psychopathic behaviour, employing psychopaths. I'm going to give you good reason why you should employ psychopaths, and a very brief look at psychopaths in sport. But right at the end, we're going to look at, have you actually got psychopathic tendencies? And we've got an instrument that we can use to measure whether you are exhibiting any of these tendencies. Psychologists can't agree on a lot of things, and a lot of things they can't agree on is very, very basic, and that is a definition of all these different terms used in psychology. So you can see here the way I've recorded that: a person with psychopathic behaviour manifests itself as amoral and antisocial behaviour, lack of ability to love or establish meaningful personal relationships, extreme egocentricity. That is a huge feature of psychopaths, and we'll have a little look at that a bit later on. Failure to learn from experience, etc. By popular request, I've popped in another one of these, what I call wretched pictures, for you to have a look at. What I'm going to ask you to do is to look at that picture and have a look and see how many circles you can see. The reason that we've put this in here is because psychopaths see the world differently to whatever normal people are. The answer's on the next slide. Did you get the answer to this? You will see that that picture looks, I suppose it looks like a door right in the centre. You're focused on that one single circle, but actually there are 17 circles altogether, and you can see that I've circled one of them in red. And of course what I've done is I've put that picture of Peter Manuel on there because I find this personally fascinating. Why was it, and the important word is why, did this man go on to commit so many horrific murders? The answer lies and lays very, very firmly on the fact that this guy was a psychopath. Looking briefly at some of these variables to determine, and they're not all of them, but to determine whether or not a person is exhibiting psychopathic behaviour, you can see impulse, egocentricity, I mentioned that earlier on, shallow emotions, lacking guilt, lacking empathy, cold-heartedness and superficial charm. And all of these have been taken and they've been put into a series of 11 questions that need responses. And what I'm going to do on the next slide is to ask you to go through those 11 questions, give your responses, and then what I'll do is I'll show you how to interpret that. Here they are. Here is the 11 questions that can help you determine whether or not you exhibit psychopathic tendencies, or if you like, you can turn the questions on their head and apply these to your partner. So you'll see the 11 questions there. I'm not going to run through all of them. You have the opportunity to look at them, but this is how you score them. So if you look at that first one, it says, I rarely plan ahead. I'm a spur of the moment kind of person. So if you strongly agree with that statement, you give it a score of 3. If you agree, you give it a score of 2. If you disagree, you give it a score of 1. And if you strongly disagree, you give it a score of 0, and go right the way through all 11 questions. How did you get on? Did you score 33 points? We often joke in the office that if you've scored 33, we'll come round and find out where you are and arrest you straight away. But of course it doesn't actually mean that. Those results just indicate that you have psychopathic tendencies, but as I said earlier on in some of these slides, that doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. Interpreting the results, often people think as psychopaths. Hannibal Lecter immediately springs to mind, but actually being psychopathic doesn't necessarily mean that you're a serial killer or even that you're going to break the law. You can see within the framework of clinical psychology, a psychopath is someone with a distinct cluster of personality traits, including charm, charisma, fearlessness, ruthlessness, narcissism, they've fallen in love with themselves, persuasiveness, or a lack of conscience. But what is really, really interesting is some of those variables that I've just read out actually apply to people that are sports people at the top of their tree. What we're going to look at now is applying psychopathy to business skills and actually employing people deliberately that exhibit psychopathic tendencies. You could see there's 4 different examples there. Let's take the first one. Call centre for insurance. I'm sure lots of you that are watching this have been through to call centres, and you get shallow emotions, like absolute lack of empathy with you, and they're cold-hearted. That is done deliberately. People are quite aware of what we're discussing now, and they will deliberately employ people to minimise the claims and also therefore to keep their business in a much better shape. Surgeons, their feelings, in my view, aren't fit for purpose. Do you want someone operating on you that has got a lot of feelings? I'll leave that answer to you. Moving on to special services, you can see here that they're cold-hearted, lacking guilt. There's obvious dangers with that, and that is around conditioning, which is another branch of psychology, as you probably know, is that a lot of special services are conditioned to kill upon order, a bit really like giving a command to a dog. They will immediately obey. And of course there has been some cases recently with war crimes trials and other investigations that are going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. Police officers, I was a police officer, as most of you know, and there has been some interesting studies. A lot of police officers exhibit superficial charm, they're lacking in guilt and cold-hearted. Not all of these, I have to say, apply to me, but unsurprisingly, sports people exhibit psychopathic tendencies. In Kevin Dutton's book, The Psychopath's Guide to Success, he writes that top sportsmen have a tendency to have a high degree of psychopathic traits, which include the following: ruthlessness, fearlessness, mental toughness, coolness under pressure, and the ability to be able to focus remorselessly on a goal. So if you look at how well some of our sports people did during the Olympic Games in Brazil, if you look at those 5 variables there, they're not often, or they're not always innate. Some of these are taught. So particularly in rowing, a lot of these variables will be taught by a psychologist. So it's not these days just pure strength for rowing. All of these have to come into play to ensure someone gets a gold medal. Thank you very, very much for tuning in and watching to and listening these 3 very short presentations on psychopaths, Peter Manuel, the ITV programme that you've been watching, and by no means least Dr. Kevin Dutton, who's written some excellent material around this. So just to finish off, as I promised, what I'd like you to do is there's 5 of Kevin Dutton's excellent books up for grabs, The Wisdom of Psychopaths, and what I want you to do is to email me the answer to this particular question. You email me at info@rightangleevents.co.uk. The question is simply this, is what is the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist? Have a very, very good Christmas.